Hello, thank you for attending the Landlord Mitigation Program webinar. I will give it just a couple of minutes to see if anyone else joins. You're welcome to use your audio pin if it remains small. I'll open up the mic so that we can talk over the phone, or you can add chat to the chat window of your webinar window, and I'll try to respond to questions as we go along. Small groups are a little bit easier to catch the questions as they come up, although a lot of the information may come up again later in the presentation. So again, we'll just give it a couple more minutes and then we'll start up. Presentation itself takes about 15 to 20 minutes, and then if there are questions after, I'll be happy to answer those as well. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to start up in just a couple of minutes as folks pop in here. I'll also, if it remains a small group, I'll open up the microphone so that you can ask questions. But if you do have questions during the webinar, do feel free to enter those in the chat, into the chat window of your GoToMeeting, and I'll try to catch those as we go along. Just a couple more minutes and we'll get started. Thank you. All right, looks like we're pretty stable at 4 people, and I'll just start introductions. Thank you again for joining the Landlord Mitigation Program webinar. My name is Nick Uva. I am the administrator of the program here at Commerce. I've also got Sarah with me. She's going to be cross-training in the program and possibly assisting in the future meetings as well. And we'll just jump in. If you have any problems, technical problems, if you're not seeing the slides move or anything, please do speak up in the chat window. And I've opened up the phone line so you can speak as well, since we are a small group too. So don't hesitate to speak up. But here at Commerce, we have several different divisions. My former supervisor, Kerry Retland, who some of you may or may not know, he used to describe Commerce as a very wide but shallow pool with nearing 375 employees and over 100 programs within Commerce. Housing makes up the largest portion, about 25% of that portfolio. But we also assist with planning, infrastructure, community facilities, housing, safety and crimes victim services, as well as business assistance. A little bit about me. I was hired by Commerce July 16th of last year to bring this program on board. They handed me the RCW and said, okay, make a program, and this is what you get. So, I come from a background of over 20 years as a property manager myself. Started in 1997. And of course, my slides, there we go. Worked for several companies, mostly in Oregon, a little bit in Utah as well, including Norris and Stevens, Income Property Management, American Property Management, based here in Bellevue, Washington, Riverstone, which is now called Graystar, and Reach Community Development, which is the largest nonprofit in Oregon that builds and serves low and severely low income households with brand new properties, usually LEED certified. In fact, the last property I was on site for them with was a gold LEED certified property. It was really pretty amazing. I got my property manager's license in 2004 and built my own company, Willamette Management Services, in 2005. We moved shortly after that to Utah, and I merged with Gall Real Estate Services, who still operates Willamette Management Services, had 109 contracts within the first year. Accredited residential manager accreditation in 2012. And yes, that's me on the back of the elephant there. I was in Southeast Asia at a sanctuary where we gave them mud baths and spent a whole day with them, and then that's me washing off the mud after the bath. Garrett, I can't make you the presenter right now, sorry. Now, the landlord mitigation program overview, what we're going to talk about here is the benefits to landlords for the program, but additionally, I'd like to discuss the benefits to rentee to subsidized tenants versus non-subsidized tenants. As an example, through 2 case studies, a 2014 study by the Apartment Owners Association California showed that the average turnover cost nationally in 2014 was $2,811. In 2016, the National Center for Housing Management showed another report showing that subsidized tenants remain in their units 22% longer than non-subsidized tenants. When we take these figures and equate them with an average property of 50 units with rents at $1,200 a month with a 5% vacancy rate, that equates to an additional $18,552.60 in income if you were to rent out that entire property to subsidized tenants, just based on those 2 figures alone. One question I like to ask landlords in large conferences is how many landlords have property debts owed to them by non-subsidized tenants? And nearly every landlord will raise their hand. And then my second question is, would $5,000 cover that? And most of them would say yes. Now, that's actually an option you have with subsidized tenants. As we're looking at it, security deposits throughout the state of Washington average $500 to $1,500. When the damages exceed that amount, you're only left with 2 real options. And the first is to go out and get a judgment against the tenant, which again adds additional costs to you as the landlord. Not just the legal costs, but the administrative costs involved in that. And then you send it to a collection agency, and if they're able to receive funds back, whether it's a subsidized or non-subsidized tenant, they're going to hold on to 50% or more of what they actually collect. So if you have a tenant that owes you $5,000, you spend an extra $2,500 going through the court system to get a judgment, and including all administrative costs, you're at $7,500. And you happen to get all of that back, you're only going to actually realize $3,750. Our program, the Landlord Mitigation Program, gives you that $5,000 of additional security, and you do not need a judgment for that. So you have guaranteed source of funds, provided you have the documents and paperwork required to file for the claim. And if you have that, then you'll get reimbursed without having to go through the administrative and legal expense of getting a judgment. The RCW 43-31-605 became effective June 7th of this last year. Now, the Landlord Mitigation Program became effective 90 days before the anti-income discrimination law, though they were tethered together in House Bill 2578. They were separated when they actually were codified. So this offers to use landlords. Sorry, did I hear a voice speak up?
Yeah, hi, it's Audrey. My screen is still showing the home Landlord Mitigation Program, the first slide. So I haven't seen any slide if you've moved on from the home.
Okay, I'm going over to my audience view. Oh, and sure enough.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know why that caught. Okay, so you should be caught up now.
Oh, yeah.
And we're getting into caught up now too. Thank you for speaking up, hon. So who qualifies for this reimbursement? Any landlord that's rented to any tenant that's received any form of subsidy, with only one exception, and those are properties owned and operated by a housing authority. So when you're thinking about this, if you have a tenant that moves in 2001, as an example, they received a one-time Catholic charity subsidy in 2002, that tenant has qualified the landlord for this program so long as the damages occur on or after June 7th of last year. That will be adjusted as we approach June 7th of this year. We have a retroactive period of 12 months that will become effective at that date. So you'll have 12 months to actually file a claim from the time of damages. Now, there are 2 different reimbursement programs available. There's the pre-move-in and the post-move-in. The pre-move-in is for a landlord that has the subsidy inspection fail because of needed repairs or modifications in the unit. So the landlord can then make those modifications and submit for reimbursement for any amount over the $500 up to a total reimbursement of $1,000 So essentially, if let's say they have two-prong outlets in the unit, and it costs $1,500 to upgrade the entire unit to three-prong outlets, grounded outlets, then they could submit a claim and receive $1,000 back. The landlord is responsible for that initial $500, though. Additionally, the delays caused by the inspection and the repairs themselves can be reimbursed above and beyond that $1,000. So up to 14 days of that, and that's prorated on the 365-day calendar year. To give you an example how we determine that, off below the picture there you'll see my scenario. We'll say a move-in was delayed by 12 days for repairs, and the rent is $1,175 a month. We're first going to break the monthly rent to an annual rent of $14,100 divided by 365 days, giving it a daily rate of $38.63. When you multiply that by the 12 days that were lost for the repairs, they're going to get an additional $463.56, and again, that's above and beyond that $1,000. Now, one thing that's important to know before we get really deep into the post-move-in claims is that if you do receive reimbursement for damages under the post-move-in claim portion, landlords are not permitted to pursue legal action against the tenant in the future. Legal action for damages, I should note, because you can file during a tenancy. That does not prevent you from going for an eviction if the tenant doesn't pay rent, but it does prevent you from taking legal action against damages. So if you start using the program, you want to utilize it to its fullest capabilities. And in this case, you can file several claims throughout tenancy. The minimum claim amount is $500, and the maximum of all claims is $5,000. So essentially, you could file 10 $500 claims and maximize your claim amount for that tenant. And that is per landlord-tenant relationship. So if landlord A rents to tenant A and tenant A moves off to landlord B, both landlord A and B are going to have the option to pursue $5,000 for other tenants in the future, including the original tenant. What you can't do is you cannot transfer a tenant within the property and expect the $5,000 to continue. So again, each claim must be at least $500, and the maximum of all claims cannot exceed $5,000. But important note, you can file several claims throughout tenancy. So it's not just a move-out claim process. If you have a tenant that, an example I have from my own experience, flushes a G.I. Joe down a toilet, and you have to replace that toilet, costs $700. In my case, we broke open the gooseneck, saw the G.I. Joe, took pictures. The tenant was responsible for the costs. You could actually submit that claim to the Landlord Mitigation Program for reimbursement, provided that tenant was subsidized. Now, inspections are incredibly crucial in a landlord-tenant relationship. It helps the landlords identify any deferred maintenance throughout the tenancy. But subsidy providers often conduct random inspections as well. And if you have a really good relationship with your subsidy provider, I have a couple scenarios in my past where I established very strong relationships with my subsidy providers so that if I had tenant relations issues, I could call them up and have them help me out. And sometimes that would include an inspection that I would request in the unit because I felt there was a lease violation. And I can't tell you how much more weight a subsidy provider calling that tenant saying they're at risk of losing their subsidy versus a notice from the landlord. That's such a much stronger message to send to a tenant, and usually gets them to comply much more quickly. But both periodic and subsidy provider inspections often help identify that deferred maintenance. And as a landlord, the last thing you want to do at a move-out is to walk in on something like this. And I'm going to double check my audience view so I'm making sure you're seeing what I'm seeing, which you are, good. This was a case where the tenant had sealed up all of the windows, all of the vents in the house, didn't turn on any fans, didn't open any windows, had actually used duct tape on the windows, put newspapers around the doors, and rarely left the unit. So the moisture content in the house rose and rose and rose, and everywhere that something was touching the wall, it just spread to the point that you can see there's quite a bit of damage. There's additional damage to the roof that happened just from wear over time. Thankfully, this wasn't my property, though. this was another property that I was aware of. But I did my 6-month inspections at all the properties, and I can't stress this enough. It was like clockwork. Every 6 months I was going into every unit, so you don't face major expenses at move out. It will be the most expensive time during the tenancy. So when you're filing those multiple claims on the landlord mitigation program, keep in mind that you're going to want to hold on to a portion at the very end, usually about half. I recommend saving about $2,500 at least for the move-out expenses. And as has been proven, these are the majority of the claims in the program. I've had a few pre-move-in claims and a couple of interim claims, but move-out claims have been the most expensive portion of the program. So what do you need to provide? The first and most important piece is a statewide vendor ID number. There's a link on the website, and as you'll notice on my slides, I have the website on every one of these slides. You will see a link or the actual website for the statewide vendor ID number in a moment on a different slide. I just recommend favoriting mine. You're going to need it for the application anyway, and it has all the links available for you on there. And I'll go into more detail on the statewide vendor ID number in a moment. But you're also going to need a subsidy program inspection report if it was required at move-in. If it's not, for the most part, I know what subsidy providers require inspections, but having an email or a document from the subsidy provider just stating we don't do inspections will help immensely. So do try to collect that when you're getting your paperwork. A written and signed rental agreement between the tenant and the landlord, that's really important. But this is the one singular reason that claims are denied more often than not, and that's the move-in, move-out condition report. It only needs to be signed at the time of move-in by the tenant, but I need to see that they had an opportunity to identify damages. This is actually required in the RCW itself. This is not an additional requirement of Commerce. So there's absolutely no way I can get around this. If the landlord does not have this form, we're not able to approve the claim. So it's crucial, and you can't go in after the fact and get it. I just say make a policy now to go ahead and just start collecting those on every move-in so you're prepared for future claims. I also have one available on the website as well if you don't have them available. Proof of subsidy payments. This could be something like an award letter, a check from the subsidy provider, or an acceptance letter from the subsidy provider to the landlord. Before and after photos of the damages and repairs. I don't want to see the photos of the unit when the tenant moved in. I want to see the actual damages and the repairs that were made. Now, this is not a hard requirement. I can work around the after photos if you have an old claim and you didn't go back in and get the photos. If the invoices match the damages shown in the photos, I'm not really going to question it that much. But invoices are an absolute requirement, receipts and invoices. You're going to use these for your taxes anyways, so keep those handy. If you have in-house maintenance repairs or if you do repairs yourself, simply go onto Microsoft Word or Google Docs and create an invoice with reasonable charges for the repairs that you make. I match these up to what I'm seeing come in from other landlords for the similar repairs. And if they seem reasonable, I'm not going to question it. Do keep in mind that carpet, however, is one item that is prorated. It's the only item that's prorated based on remaining life. So carpet is determined to have a 7-year lifespan, and that's a national average, and it's actually accepted by HUD. So when we're looking at a carpet replacement, we're going to need to see the proof of the previous installation. So if you have receipts or documentation showing that the carpets were new, in fact, one thing that I like to see is in the move and move out condition report, if the landlord mentions the carpets are new and the tenant signed off on it, then that's acceptable as well. I can prorate it based on that. So as an example, if you had a tenant that was there for 2 years, and it was new at the time of move-in and everyone had signed off, or you have the receipts from that last install, and you had to replace the carpets because, well, I had a guy rebuild a motorcycle engine in his living room. So, you know, things happen. But if you have those receipts and you send them in, we're going to deduct 2 years of life off of that carpet and determine the reimbursement based on that. And then notice to tenants for any unpaid charges included in claim. This is a fun little aha moment. This is where you identify that we're not just covering physical damages. There are some other costs involved, and I'll go into that in detail in a moment, but keep this on your mind because we will be covering additional costs beyond physical. And then you complete the online claim form. Again, on the website, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to complete. I do ask that you attach documents to it. There is a limit to 10 attachments. So if you can combine some documents, that helps. If you don't have a scanner, your phone's camera will work just fine. Right now, I have the bandwidth so that if a claim comes in that's missing a document or two, I'll email you and tell you exactly what I need. And then at that point, you can just attach it to the email as well. So as I mentioned, we were going to talk about the statewide vendor ID number. This, couple of things here, a couple reasons we use this. First off, you need one in the state of Washington whenever you're going to receive payment from a state entity. Now, also, commerce is subject to public record disclosure, and we don't want your personal information on file here. So it's stored with enterprise services when they issue you the statewide vendor ID number, and that is protected from public record disclosure. So when they do a public records disclosure or request, then they're only going to see the statewide vendor ID number and your name. They're not going to see your bank account information or your address. Though they may be able to receive that through enterprise services, we're not going to provide that. And you can expect to receive a 1099 at the beginning of the following year. This is business income as if the tenant were paying you back for their own damages themselves. So you want to keep track of that. So when you receive the 1099, you'll be able to file taxes the following year. You only need one statewide vendor ID number per business entity. So if you happen to have multiple properties but an LLC that you manage, then you only need the one statewide vendor ID number, and you only need that for the lifetime of the program. You don't have to get one every time. It takes about 3 to 5 days to get it if you haven't already. As I mentioned, this is the website that you can collect that on. Just use the link on my website. It's a whole lot easier. It's a form that you can fill out online, but you have to print and sign and then fax it in. So the best way to do is just go ahead and get it out of the way. I do recommend property managers have owners complete these forms, again, for the reason that 1099s will be issued. But you and your accountants can have a conversation about that to see how best to make that work for you. And claims, again, the June 7th, 2018 is a line in the sand that's going to disappear here pretty quickly here in a couple of months. And that's because we're going to go to the 12-month retroactive period. But again, the tenancy could have began at any time before the state and the subsidy could have occurred at any time before the state, as long as you have records of both. As long as the damages occurred on or after June 7th of 2018, or within the last 12 months once we approach that date this year, then they'll be covered under the program. If it happened on June 6th, 2018, I can't cover it, unfortunately. Now, if you don't have a copy of the housing voucher, housing assistance inspection report, the best thing to do is to go out and actually reach out to the subsidy provider and request copies. They're in the same position where they want to keep their subsidized tenants housed. They want to offer housing to as many people as possible. So to help avoid evictions, to help avoid losing vouchers, this is all an option that they're going to assist you with. And I've gone around the state, I've spoken with many subsidy providers, and they're all happy to assist with this. So just reach out to your subsidy providers and ask for copies. Email documentation from the subsidy provider, you can forward that on. I'll accept that as proof, especially on the older records. It doesn't have to be complicated, it doesn't have to be precise. This is a low barrier program, and I intended that for the benefit of landlords to build the confidence in renting to subsidized tenants. Now, the difference between a housing assistance inspection report and a move-in, move-out condition report. The housing assistance inspection report is something that they do to determine habitability of a unit. It's going to be more technical in their form, But more importantly, the move-in, move-out condition report is the tenant's opportunity to note damage. They're not involved in the housing assistance inspection report. They are involved in the move-in, move-out condition report, and this is the one that the tenant has the opportunity to protect their security deposit with. In fact, it's even required in the state of Washington that you have that form if you're going to levy charges against a security deposit. So both documents are required unless the subsidy provider didn't offer inspection or require inspections at the time of move-in. And when can you submit a claim? Again, you can submit a claim at any time during tenancy. Each individual claim must exceed $500. The maximum of all combined claims cannot exceed $5,000, except the pre-move-in claim. That's separate. Any awarded claim of the post-move-in portion prohibits the landlord from, or any collection agency on their behalf, from taking legal action against the tenant. A question that's come up a few times on this matter is whether or not they can submit to an insurance company for the difference. And the answer to that is it's really at the discretion of the landlord. However, I do request that you exercise caution. Insurance companies will oftentimes take legal action against a tenant to recoup losses. So you will want to have a very long conversation with your insurance company to ensure that that will not happen, as that will put you in jeopardy if they do take action against a tenant. Now, you may only submit one claim for modification required to pass inspection. That's that pre-move-in inspection, that $1,000 one. You only get one shot at it, so make sure all the receipts and everything's included. If something's missing, I'll request the information, but you only get one opportunity to file that claim. So this is that aha moment I talked about earlier. What damages can a landlord claim? Yes, there's the physical damages, anything above and beyond normal wear and tear, with loss of life to carpets. But it'll also include unpaid rent charges associated with tenancy, which includes late charges, non-compliance charges, legal expenses, and utility charges. These are available at move-out. So let's pretend you have an eviction, you have a couple of months of utility bills. So you have all those expenses that you can add into your claim here and be reimbursed for. On average, we're seeing evictions and utilities run a couple of months worth of rent plus attorney fees plus the 2 months worth of utilities, maybe 3 months worth of utilities in some cases. Those are adding up quickly. That's $2,500 in a lot of landlords. The landlords are having to take a loss on that you can claim. So, and then you have the actual turnover costs on top of that, so you can easily get up to the $5,000 mark if you're dealing with an eviction. We do not pay lease break charges, though. So if you have a tenant vacate early and you need a lease break, we're not going to cover that. And the reason is simple. We're just not going to track or police whether or not you move someone in later on down the road and you're collecting double rents. So for that reason, we don't take lease break charges or fees. But again, when we're faced with evictions and such, you're probably going to be getting close to that $5,000 maximum anyway. The review process, right now it's going pretty quickly. We have funds available and claims are coming in. I'm reviewing them within 1 to 2 business days. You're going to receive a receipt immediately after successfully submitting an application on the claim system. And then you'll get a response from me within 10 business days guaranteed, but usually right now it's like 1 or 2 business days, and funds are paid as available. This is a continually replenishing account. These funds are available, come in monthly from all the counties throughout the state, with a couple of counties paying annually. So the funds are constantly being made available. Right now, like I said, we have a little bit of a surplus of funds, so claims are getting paid immediately. But once we're at a point where we're getting so many claims that the funds are exhausted monthly, it may take longer. You may be facing 6, 8 weeks, maybe 10 weeks before you see payment. But once your claim is approved, you will receive payments. You'll just be put into a queue in those scenarios. Typically around the summer months, I would expect. Any denied claims will be notified immediately upon decision, which brings us to our next and last slide. Can you appeal the denial? The denials cannot be appealed if it's for any reason other than lack of information or lack of documentation. I don't write off claims completely that are missing documentation or information. I will note them as denied, but you'll have the opportunity to send that information if you're able to locate it. So example, the move-in, move-out condition report. If that wasn't provided, but you happen to find a copy of it and you resubmit that form to me, I'll reopen the case and review it at that time. That's because my bandwidth allows it at this point. In the future, as the program becomes busier, when we're actually quickly multiplying our number of claims every month, that may not be an option. But if a claim is denied for any reason other than lacking information or lacking documentation, such as we find that the charges weren't warranted in the program, as in one example, someone has replaced a toilet when the lid was broken and they wanted the full replacement cost of the toilet, I'm not going to approve that cost, not when a $40 lid would have covered the cost that they spent $700 on. So do understand that the claims have to be legitimate, that they will be scrutinized, and I'll have communication with you as the landlord to explain that, and if there's an adjustment that has to be made on my end, I'm going to go in favor of adjusting it rather than denying it. And I'll explain to you why I've found that adjustment was needed, and we can have a conversation about that if it comes up. But again, if we hit that hard denial, you can't really an appeal, but you can go out and get a judgment, which again is the last resort. We don't want you having to spend the money. I'm going to try to get it approved with you rather than have you go out and exhaust your efforts to get a judgment. And then once you have that judgment, if a judge finds that the charges were warranted, send it to me and we'll get you paid up to the $5,000 mark. Keep in mind though, once you receive a reimbursement from the program, you have to go back to the court and say that it's satisfied. And that's regardless of the fact that the judgment's for over the $5,000 mark. So if you receive a judgment for $8,000, you receive a check from us for the maximum amount of $5,000, you still have to go back and state that the judgment's satisfied and write off the additional $3,000. Well, that's a lot of information, so please, if you have questions, please do ask. I'll open it up now, and in the background, I'm going to open up our website, which is going to show you some scaled or actual detail of the program. So, have any questions out there?
Hi, Nick. I think that there's a couple questions in the chat window. Would you be able to take a look at those?
Oh, there they are. They're popping up. Heather, you got that? Yep, Aubrey. A lot of people saying the screen didn't pop up. Let's see. So, Garrett, your question about having to fail the subsidy program inspection in order to file for a reimbursement, that's only that initial $1,000 one. So, yes, you have to fail an inspection to receive reimbursement for the repairs and modifications made to pass an inspection to rent to a subsidized tenant. And Heather, I'll be happy to send you the presentation. I actually have a shorter venue, so presentation that doesn't include my elephant slide. So I'll send over to you. You should be seeing the web page now. If you haven't been to this page, you'll notice there are a lot of options or forms and links available. Statewide vendor ID number, frequently asked questions, the RCW itself. There's a PDF version of this training program. It also talks about the documentation that's required. Oh, there we go. And if you scroll down, you'll see the actual numbers. These are real-time numbers. They're updated as claims come in, and I update my findings. You'll see since our first claim was filed November 7th, since then we've received 90 claims, 73 have been approved, totaling $205,000 in reimbursement to landlords throughout Washington. Average claim amount is $3,207. That's both pre and post move-in, so you've got some smaller amounts, and then you've got the maximum $5,000 claims in there. And then if you scroll down a little farther inside that window, you'll even see the denials. Now, as I mentioned, so 33% are charges not covered by the program. Those are a lot of funds that are just the excess ones, like that toilet that I talked about, or carpets that someone tried to get a full reimbursement for carpets, but they didn't have proof of the original install. But when it comes to forms, 22% is the move and move out condition report by itself. Now, the one funny thing I find is on the county side, we're seeing 39% in King County. That doesn't surprise me. But Pierce County is actually low at 5%. I expected that to be higher. Snohomish follows up in second place with 13%. Spokane at 8%. Those two I expected. I'm not sure why Pierce is sitting low. I expected that to be a bit higher. Again, any questions, feel free to ask. Heather, I owe you a copy of the presentation, so I'll get that to you here shortly.
Hi, Nick. Question about the taking legal action or not taking legal action. Would that include if there's amount above the 5,000 and we're submitting it to a collection agency, or is that permitted?
I'm sorry. So you have an amount over 5,000 you're submitting to a collection agency?
Yeah. So if we go through the program, we request at move out an amount, it gets approved. So we are not allowed to take legal action, of course, for damages. But if there's still an amount that's owed that maybe exceeded that 5,000, are we permitted to submit that to our collection agency?
No, under the requirement, you're not permitted to take legal action. You have to write off the additional amount.
Okay.
That's not uncommon. I've seen some very high claims come in, and we're hitting 5,000 on several of them. Especially when we're talking about evictions and court proceedings that take sometimes months to go through, and you have 4, 5, 6. I had one that had 8 months worth of rent due, back rent due. So at the end, you're faced with $10,000, $12,000 of that. So 5,000 is a cap, and I'll award that if there's a warranted $5,000 in the claim, which usually isn't hard to prove in that point. But you do have to write off any excess. You're not permitted to pursue the excess.
Okay. Thank you.
Certainly. And Lexi, I did get your message. I'll correct that. Thank you. All right, well, if there are no further questions, thank you for attending. And by all means, if you have questions, don't hesitate to use my email and call me. I'm happy to walk through what I can. I am coming back into my busy tour season, so email might be the better option. But again, I try to call everyone back within the same day or next business day. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.